The book of Proverbs, King Solomon teaches, Ateret tiferet seva b'derach tzedakah timatzeh. Gray hair, sign of old age, is a crown of glory. It is attained by the way of righteousness. To live to 104 years old is not only to accumulate years, but to wear them like a crown. Jewish tradition calls old age that crown of glory not because of the number alone, but because of the righteousness, of the kindness and resilience that can be displayed in those years. Sarah Ackerman wore her years like that beautiful crown. Her good nature and her sweetness and her devotion to our faith and traditions throughout her life, even the face of loss, gave her a quiet strength that carried her through everything and inspired her family and friends. And now, at the end of that long life, as we accompany her from this world, we respond with the words of blessing that affirm God's place in the affairs of this world, even as we grieve. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed is God, who is the judge of truth. Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken. Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. Blessed is the name of the Lord our God. Today we gather to escort Sarah to her eternal home, next to her husband George and her daughter Esther, the sacred grounds of Hebrew Cemetery, and to offer comfort to her family. Our hearts are with her children, Alan, Penny, and Steve, and Bernie and Terry, to her grandchildren, Michael, to Shannon, to Rachel and Brad, to Benjamin, to Amy and Calvin, to Jason and Yvonne, and to Adam and to Emily, and to her 10 great-grandchildren. We open our service today words of prayer from Sefer Tehillim, from the book of Psalms, as we link Sarah's life with the ancient traditions of the Jewish people and the eternity of God. Cantor Lissick will chant the words of Psalm 23, our psalm of comfort in difficult times.
Adonai roi lo echsar bino Yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yenaleini nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo am kilech b'kitz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni Aruch lefanai, lefanai, shulchan egetzorirai, tishanta vashemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai Adonai roi lo echsar. Adonai roi lo echsar.
Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God lays me down in green pastures and leads me to the still waters. God renews my life and guides me in right paths, for that is God's way. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup is overflowing. Surely goodness and mercy shall pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Last year, I had the privilege of welcoming a Bible study group from Unity Presbyterian Church to our sanctuary here at Temple Israel in order for them to learn about the Jewish community and Jewish practice. Were any of you here in that group? Okay. It's a wonderfully curious group. Bible study groups are great, whether they're Jewish or Christian, similar people. It's a wonderful group. But they had already learned about Judaism from a teacher far more accomplished than myself. Every person in that group knew Sarah Ackerman. Each person had learned from her and had enjoyed her hospitality. From her home on Bank Street, in an area that we might think of as something of a Jewish wilderness, Sarah spent decades living a Jewish life and sharing the rich beauty of that life with her neighbors. In the Torah and in Jewish tradition, our story begins with Sarah. Our Jewish family begins with Sarah. Sarah Imenu, Sarah the matriarch, moves with her husband Abraham to a new land far away from her birthplace. And together they build the first Jewish family and life, each in their own way. While Abraham teaches about God through words, Sarah taught by embodying the traditions through her actions and through her very being. The Midrash describes Abraham going out, looking for people to bring into the tent, while Sarah cooks the special meals that make the teaching possible and are Jewish lessons in and of themselves. So it was with our Sarah, Sarah Ackerman. She was born to Avram and Pessel in Alabama. Her father had come to America in 1914, but because of World War I, was unable to bring her mother over until 1920. Sarah was born a year later and grew up in Birmingham and Eufaula. As a child, she witnessed the struggles her parents faced as immigrants, but also the determination and hard work that ultimately led them to success. Although her father was not a religious man, he knew that his wife wanted to live a Jewish life, and he made it possible. Her parents made her speak English in the home so that they could learn from her. And she, in turn, learned from her mother how to cook the Jewish specialties that became part of her life, including, but I'm sure not limited to, things like kasha, stuffed cabbage, kugel, kishka, tongue, gefilte fish made from scratch, and poppy seed hamantaschen for Purim next week. At 15 years old, Sarah met George. He was an orphan from Canada who had won a scholarship to yeshiva in Chicago and studied to become a cantor and rabbi. He came to Birmingham to teach Hebrew and serve as an assistant rabbi and rented a room up the street from Sarah's family. She was introduced to him by a friend outside his synagogue, and they would talk on the bus and at a Valentine's Day dance, even though they had come with other dates. After 1 year of college, Sarah dropped out to marry George. They moved around before settling in Fort Mill and opening the Economy Store, later to be Ackerman's Style Center. George may have been good at the PR, but her children describe Sarah as the brains behind the business. There, they became a fixture in the community, respected as one of the few Jewish families. In an interview about her life, the interviewer asked her, "Would you think of yourself as a Southern Jew or a Jewish Southerner? In other words, what's the core part of your identity?" Somewhat of a philosophical question, but she simply responded, "I think I'm very Jewish, if that's what you're asking. And I find that my friends don't mind me being that way. My Christian friends, they don't mind me being really Jewish. I walk with this girl. Really, she's Lutheran, but she goes to the Presbyterian church here because the Lutheran church is in Rock Hill. So she decided she would go there. She's just very interested in what we do, and I'm interested in what she does. That quote encapsulates her approach. Her family described the soft wall between her and her neighbors that allowed her to integrate into the community without assimilating, without losing who she was. George taught Judaism to their neighbors, while Sarah taught by living it. Keeping kosher, which was so important to her, never stopped her from visiting friends, and those friends knew whether she was visiting them or whether they were coming to her to play mahjong to avoid the treif. At the fish market in Charlotte, the employees knew what was kosher by watching what Mrs. Ackerman would or would not buy. Sarah and George were founders of the Chamber of Commerce in Fort Mill, but they wouldn't go to the annual dinner because they always served chicken. So one year, the chairman called them and told them that year they would serve fish because they wanted them to come. They were happy to go, but still didn't get to eat when the fish came out wrapped in bacon. Some people don't get it. When George organized Jewish people to volunteer at the hospital on Christmas Day for Operation Snowflake, he and Sarah would get calls from Christians who wanted to volunteer, not because they were Jewish, but just because they didn't want to be with their families on that day. When they closed the store in 1985, they were able to throw themselves into Jewish life and culture. First thing they did was rent an apartment in Israel for 3 months, a special time for them. Locally, they were organizers of the Yiddish Institute and the Interfaith Retreat at Wild Acres. As always, George led the services and Sarah did the cooking. She was the wind beneath the wings of so many people. A treasured picture in her living room shows them with their friends at Wild Acres, and Sarah would proudly tell visitors about their good times. In the Torah, Sarah Imenu was blessed with a long life, 127 years for her. According to tradition, she maintained her vibrancy and her goodness until the end. So too was it with Sarah Ackerman, who was blessed to live 104 years. Moving to the Riverwalk gave her the chance to socialize with new people, and friends could rarely call her in her room because she was always out and about with others. No matter how ill she became, she never lost that sense of sweetness that charmed her family and friends. And even if she couldn't remember you, she could fake it really well. The staff there, of course, knew she would have the fish. Sarah's life is a lesson that there are different types of Torah, different types of teaching. Some Torah is found in the scrolls and the Ark and in the pages of the books that we study. But some Torah, perhaps the most powerful kind, is found in the lives of special people like Sarah Ackerman, who model and who teach with every fiber of their being and with every year of their lives. Tehi nishmata tzrura b'tzror hachayim. May her soul be bound in the bonds of eternal life, and may her memory always be for a blessing. We're now going to hear from members of her beloved family, blessed to have her in their lives for so long. I'm going to call on her son, Bernie, who's actually going to share remarks from cousins Cheryl and Eleanor.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Cantor, and thank you for all of you coming today to celebrate my mother's funeral. I was going to tell a little bit more history about Mom, but I think the Rabbi covered it pretty well. You know, when she was born in Montgomery, she was there just as really an elementary up to age 4 or 5, and then she moved to Eufaula. And Eufaula at that time had a population of about 4,000 people, which turned out to be the same population that Fort Mill was when they moved to Fort Mill in 1952. So, but my sister and I decided that we weren't going to talk today. We're going to let our 3 of the grandchildren talk and see my grandma, great-grandma through their eyes. But I have one reading that I want to do that is from 2 of our cousins. They're my Dad's brother's children. I think they're watching us on Zoom going? Yep. Okay, so they're there in Toronto listening to me. But they were very special. They were two musicians. They played at almost every Jewish event that we had, from weddings to bar mitzvahs to brises, everything. They would come down and play. Eleanor played the piano and Cheryl played the flute, and they called their group Ivory and Silver. Ivory for the piano and Silver for the flute. And it was a group of two, and they were wonderful. And they came to Fort Mill at least twice a year to visit Mom. And I asked them to put down in words some thoughts about Mom. And so here they are. And it says, Aunt Sarah, there are too many things to list about the things we love about you and our time together, but here's just a few. Waking up to the smell of coffee that you made in your little percolator. Sharing stories for hours at your kitchen table while enjoying your famous coffee cake. Rabbi didn't mention her coffee cake, but she had 5 or 6 of these. Which shape that would be. It almost looked like a big snake coffee cake. And she kept 4 or 5 of those in the freezer, and they always came out when people came over to visit, or she was always giving some away. But shopping with you at Ackerman's while you helped us pick out beautiful clothes, and especially the Agner bags. Having you help us navigate the streets of Fort Mill and Rock Hill as Cheryl tried to find you the perfect parking spot. Sharing our memories of our parents, Eileen and Dave, with you. Learning to cook and bake at your side, and now having all of those recipes to share with our families, especially Aunt Sarah's coleslaw. We have loved every minute with you, Aunt Sarah, and will cherish them, and you always, with our love and deepest gratitude for being our favorite aunt, Eleanor and Cheryl.
Call on granddaughter Rachel Kokenauer.
Thank you, and I'm actually going to say hi to my nephew, Matthew Leader, who wanted to be here so badly, and I think he's online. So, Matthew, we all know you're here now. So, when I think about Grandma Sarah, I just don't think about all the numbers of years. I think about the life inside of those years, the traditions. You've already heard a lot about the food, the stories, and the love. Growing up, Grandma taught me what it meant to live like a Jew. And she taught my mom that too, so we lived it in our house. But not only in the religious sense, but in the lived, everyday traditions that shaped our family. Shabbat dinners at her house were really special. I mean, we had them in my house too, but it was something different at Grandma's. The white tablecloth was always perfectly positioned on the table and laid out. We would light candles. We would say the hamotzi and the kiddush, and then there was her brisket that was like no other. And sometimes there was tongue, which I happily ate until the day I asked her, what exactly is tongue? And I never touched it again. Her gefilte fish, it was nothing like that stuff out of a can. It was made from scratch. Her French toast was from the leftover challah, and she covered it in cinnamon and sugar. I'm looking at my son George now, and that was the best I'd ever had. And I've never had it anywhere else, but I've tried to make it for my George. And maybe it's not as good as hers, I'm sorry. She taught me how to make her famous coffee cake that we've already heard about. And that was a lesson in patience, because the dough had to rise for a full day before you could roll it out and then put it the cinnamon and sugar and the jam and the nuts and the raisins, and then you'd roll it up. But Grandma told me once that good things not only take time, but it also takes good ingredients. She said, why are you buying this instant stuff? I said, Grandma, you take so long to make your pudding. You know, they make instant pudding. And she's like, yeah, but does it taste good? There really was no substitute for her and her cooking. And she never missed an important event in our life. When she and Grandpa were running their store in Fort Mill and we were living in Whiteville, she still made it to all of our major life events. And when she built that pool in her backyard, I truly believe she did it for me. That's how loved she made us all feel. I actually lived with Grandma and Grandpa the summer before I turned 13 to study for my bat mitzvah. I was 12, which is not an easy age. And it was a hard summer in many ways, but she tried to make it special. She took me to the complex in Fort Mill to try to meet other kids. And she tried to teach me to cook. I wasn't really interested at 12. And she even, what I remember the most, is she even took me to the dime store so I could buy my first eye makeup, and never once made fun of me of how horrible I'm sure it looked. We got to travel together to Israel twice, once for my brother Samuel's bar mitzvah, and then again for mine. She even baked alongside my mom for my bat mitzvah that we celebrated back in Whiteville too. And later when I got to travel to Israel for BBYO, it was one of those times when they had their apartment after the retirement in Israel for the summer. She was right there waiting for me just to make sure I was okay and had traveled, and she wanted me to know that she was going to be there if I needed something during my time there that summer. And that was just Grandma, always making sure her grandchildren were fine. When Benjamin was born, where's Benjamin, my brother, she jumped back into action because his bris fell on Passover. So you know what that means. All the preparation that had been done and all the cooking had to be recooked. And even at Benjamin's most recent visit with Grandma, she loved to remind him of that story and of his bris. And you can sure how well that goes over with Benjamin. I heard about that. As I grew into adulthood, our relationship evolved, but her presence never faded. When Brad and we've actually lived in this area twice, but when we first moved here in 2001, we lived in Fort Mill. And some of the memories that we have from that time is she always came over on Halloween and would wear this witch hat. And she would help us give out the candy. And then when we moved back to the area, she came to our house again to help us give out Halloween candy. And both of the times that we lived there, we had a cat that some may have referred to as mean. I just think he was misunderstood. But Grandma, she still embraced that cat, and when we were not around, would come and feed that cat, and I think fed him probably really too well. When we bought our first home in Charleston, she came to visit me and Brad, and we were so proud of this little starter home. And we had found this perfect little restaurant on John's Island that we couldn't wait to take Grandma to because they had homemade tomato jam. And we knew she would love this jam. And she did. She loved the jam. But the fish, not so much. And she let the chef know. We can tell you about that story another time. And then when we moved back that second time to Charlotte, one of our greatest joys was to host her for Thanksgiving. And it often fell near or on her birthday, so we would celebrate that too. Brad and Benjamin and Shannon and Matthew and Bennett and George and my mom when she was around and when Samuel when he was here, we all really looked forward to that time together with Grandma. And she would always tell me how delicious my cooking was. And I made her famous slaw at Thanksgiving. Most people don't have coleslaw at Thanksgiving, but we had to make that. But I knew it really didn't compare to hers, but I tried. I'm just grateful that we had those times with her. And in recent years, getting to visit her in assisted living, it became a different kind of gift. She loved to share her most fond memories of each of us and what was most memorable to her about each of us. And we may have heard it once or twice or many more times, but we loved hearing that story and what she remembered about us. But I tell you, if you asked her a question about what she had done in 1980 or where she had traveled to, she could remember it with this extraordinary, vivid memories. Grandma taught me about tradition. Grandma taught me about showing up, about feeding people as a way of loving them. She taught me about resilience, about stepping up when something needs to be done, and she taught me about the importance of family. She lived through more than any of us could ever imagine. Wars, loss, change, reinvention, and through it all, she remained herself. Strong, capable, generous, and amazingly patient. If I could close my eyes, or if I close my eyes, I really can see back to those days in her kitchen, lighting those Shabbat candles, and her beautiful Shabbat table with the beautiful, perfect challah. And that's how I'm always going to remember her, creating warmth and creating those connections and creating home. So Grandma Sarah, thank you for teaching me how to build a table that people want to visit and sit at, and I'm going to do my best to carry that forward. Thank you.
Call on grandson Jason Ackerman.
When I was born, Grandma was 65. It's pretty old. But who knew that we'd get 39 plus years together? Grandma was born in 1921. Warren G. Harding was president then. She attended the University of Alabama in 1939 for 1 year until she met her husband, George. The football stadium then held 6,000 people. Bear Bryant was an assistant coach. She lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the foundation of the modern-day state of Israel, turbulent 60s, the first man on the moon, Vietnam, and on and on and on. Rumor has it that Grandma was born roughly 9 months after her mom and 3 older siblings came from Poland via Ellis Island to meet her dad in Montgomery, Alabama. However, Grandma spent the majority of her youth in Eufaula, Alabama. I took her on a trip there in 2007. I'm not sure what it's like now, but 20 years ago, there was a Sonnet drive-through, a Walmart, and a Howard Johnson where we stayed, and that was it. To be the only Jewish family in a small town in the South would be a theme of her life. Starting there, moving to Walhalla, a few things in between, and eventually to Fort Mill, where she would spend the final 75 years of her life, winning Citizen of the Year award a few years ago. During that trip to Eufaula, we met up with her best friend from the time, Margaret. They hadn't seen each other in 50 years, but they quickly caught up, and I got to hear some great stories of Grandma's early life. She played basketball. She was the valedictorian of her high school, proudly beating out Margaret, she would tell me in the car. I don't know if that's true, but that's what she told me. Although she only went there for 1 year to Alabama, education was very important to her. She put all 4 of her kids through college and even went back after 65 to Winthrop to continue her education. She proudly boasted to me that she got all A's at Winthrop when most of the students were 45 years younger than her. Growing up, Grandma and Grandpa's house was the center of the family. When anyone in the family came to visit, from the Canadians to the Chicagoans to the Israelis, we would always meet up at 302 Main Street. We would spend summers at the pool. They had a diving board. I don't know if Rachel remembers that. I still remember the Passover was allowed to move from the kids' table to the adult table. Whenever going to Grandma's, you better show up hungry. She was always cooking or serving salmon croquettes or vegetable soup or chocolate cake, even though to her there were only 2 types of people who were too fat or people who were too skinny. I don't think I ever heard her remark that someone's weight was in her mind the correct weight. Judaism was at the center of her and her family's life. She kept kosher in Fort Mill, South Carolina, having double saints, which had to confuse the builders who built her house in 1952. She loved to travel at a time when it was not as popular to travel overseas. I remember when I was young going through slideshows of her trip to Egypt and Peru, and of course her many trips to Israel. A favorite memory is when we took a trip as a family to Israel together after my high school graduation. I can credit her for giving me a passion for travel. Grandma outlived her husband George, her daughter Esther, and her grandson Samuel. She outlived all of her contemporaries. She was truly the last of her generation in our family. For some, that would have aged her, but Grandma had an uncanny zest and love for life, which she maintained until the end. She made friends wherever she went, even up until the end at Harbor Chase. Even for an assisted living facility, Grandma was old. There aren't a lot of 104-year-olds around, but she fit in like a glove and made friends with people decades younger than her. Grandma was the perfect mix of Southern hospitality and Jewish grandmother. She never met a person she didn't like or have an impact on. Even to this day, my friends who would visit from college 20 years ago, they still ask about Grandma. My wife, Yvonne, claims that after meeting Grandma, she knew she wanted to marry me. Thanks, Grandma. She got to know our son, Sammy, and even last week got to see a picture of baby Lucy. Grandma was also very funny and never took herself too seriously. She was gracious, kind, and was always there when you needed her, whether it was giving you $12 to play 9 holes at Fort Mill Golf Club or making you an omelet after school. We could go on and on. After all, there's 104 years worth of stories to be told. But to me, Grandma was a role model of how to live your life and how to age gracefully. Rest in peace, Grandma. We'll remember you forever.
I invite up grandson Adam Ackerman.
When I got asked to speak, my first thought was, how in the world can I come up with the words to honor our grandma? I don't need to tell you about how nice and caring she was. You all already know that. She was truly the most kind-hearted person most of us will ever meet. If you think about her life, all 104 years of it, she lived through so many different eras, from being a child of the Great Depression to World War II to the Holocaust to segregation, tech boom, and COVID. It's truly amazing to think about what she saw and lived through. I've always wondered how all these life experiences shaped her into who we all knew and loved. She loved her family, thinking about how many grandkids and great-grandkids she had. She was rich in what mattered most. I'll cherish all the family gatherings we had, whether it was birthdays or Jewish holidays. Seeing the different generations of Ackermans together are memories that will live forever in our family's hearts. She also loved her community and did everything she could to make it a better place. I remember growing up, she would come to our elementary school to teach kids to read. She would also come to our classes and teach about Jewish holidays, like the rabbi mentioned, I guess Bible study as well. Not only did she teach the students, but she also taught the teachers. As you imagine, growing up, like everyone said in Fort Mill, there wasn't a vibrant Jewish community there. She never stopped teaching and was always eager to learn new things. She taught me to be proud of our Jewish heritage. In the 5th grade, when all students in Fort Mill went to Bank Street Elementary, I used to walk to her house after school. The first thing she would do when I walked through the door was offer me some food. Like every good grandma, she wouldn't let you be hungry, and it was impossible to say no to her. She had plenty of specialties, but when I think about everything she cooked, what stuck in my mind for some reason were her eggs. She made the best eggs. I'm not sure how she made something so simple, taste so good, but she did it. It would also be a sin if I did not mention her chocolate pie, which was already mentioned up here today. She made the best chocolate pie, and until the day she died, she had a sweet tooth and was always surrounded by candy. I have so many memories I can share, swimming in the pool that she built for Rachel, or walking to the Saints card shop on Main Street to buy basketball cards, or how she and her friend Hazel carpool to our holiday party each year. I'm pretty sure the combined age of that car was 190. and it's pretty scary to think about. We knew how sweet and kind she was. Well, I'm gonna tell you a story about where she got angry with me. I can honestly only think of 2 times in my life that I saw her angry. I'm sure if you ask my dad or Uncle Alan, there's probably many more of that, but probably more for Alan than my dad. But it was 4th of July, and I was maybe 13 or 14, and she was watching us since my parents were out of town. And like any American teenage boy, the 4th of July meant you lit fireworks. Well, I had some friends over, and we lit some sort of Roman candles or missiles or something, and they came flying back at us, and she saw that from our deck, and boy, did she get mad, even more mad than she already was that we were scaring our dog. And as you can imagine, seeing her youngest grandson and her friends almost lose fingers on her watch wasn't what she wanted. And we kept going until we ran out of ammo, and she kept yelling at us for stop. And you might ask why I'm sharing this story. Like Rachel said, there were stories that she remembered you by. Well, for some reason, she never let me live that story down. No matter how old she got, she remembered that story. It was either that or how I was the light bulb guy. She called me to change light bulbs in her house because of how tall I am. I think she just liked to see me just reach up there and change light bulbs. For anyone who drove down Bank Street, you knew which house was hers by 2 distinct things. One was the Israeli flag she had proudly flying outside her front door, and the other was her perfect yard. She loved being outside and gardening. She took so much pride in her yard, and there was never a weed in there. She may also have been known to pick her neighbor's weeds from now and then as well. She was outside watering flowers or picking weeds every day. It's probably what kept her alive so long. She was so active, walking, playing mahjong, and doing swimnastics well into her 90s. I'm gonna end with this. I'm not sure what happens when we pass, but I've always envisioned, for some reason, that you wait in line at the gates of heaven, where you talk to God, where he decides your fate. Everyone in this room knows how great of a person she was, and there's no doubt she's walking through those gates. But I honestly feel bad for the poor soul that's in line behind her. For most people, it's probably less than a minute conversation with God, but we all knew with my grandma, there was no 1 or 2 minute conversation. She's probably naming every type of flower outside the gate, chatting up God while the person's sweating bullets, thinking if he or she is gonna get in. We'll all cherish those conversations we had with her. Grief is the price we pay for love. We miss you, we love you.
I call on Sarah's daughter, Penny, to share some words from her daughter, Amy.
So this eulogy was written by my daughter, Amy Fox, who recently moved with her family to Cape Town, South Africa. She's asked that I read it in her absence. My grandma Sarah and I had a very special relationship. She was a stable constant in my life as I grew up just a 20-minute drive from her home in Fort Mill. Grandma's home, especially back when my grandpa George was alive, often smelled like Shabbat dinner or some other delicious food. As a kid, I insisted Grandma's pots must be different from the ones my mom had, since the food cooked in them tasted way better. And I want to make an aside to this, that analysis, when she was about 3, stayed for only a short time, when we all had to agree that Grandma was a better cook than I am. I marveled at how many dishes Grandma made for Shabbat. I also loved being at Grandma's home for Jewish holidays and family celebrations. Spending time with my cousins and other relatives was a highlight for me as an only child. My legendary first sentences, quote, "More tongue, Grandma," and, quote, "Want some yuckies," were spoken in Grandma's kitchen, a demand for more of the delicious meat she often made, and the Hershey's Kisses she always had in the silver bowl in her living room. I loved walking on that plush living room carpet, The yuckies were an added bonus. I spent weekends swimming in Grandma and Grandpa's pool, enjoying Grandma's superior cooking, walking Ozzie and Blackie, the dogs my grandparents had at the time, and watching TV sitcoms like Saved by the Bell with my cousin Benjamin. In my teens, I learned to make some of Grandma's recipes with her, including ground beef, stuffed cabbage, the secret is the sour salt, and her famous yeast dough coffee cakes. We also collaborated on an article published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in 2008, which highlighted her vinegar coleslaw, a recipe I continue to make even at my new home in South Africa. Grandma and I went on several very memorable trips together. It all started in high school with my driving her to Atlanta to see her sister Frida. That was the first time I saw so many lanes of traffic. I think there were 16 lanes across. It was a bit scary, but Grandma had faith in me and we made it. We also cruised Tahiti together. I shared a room with Grandma and my Aunt Esther. We had some very fun times on that cruise, especially when Grandma drank one Yellowbird, her favorite drink, and then sank into a couch unable to get up on her own. Later that same year, Grandma and my mom, Penny, visited me in Japan, where I studied for a semester. At first, Grandma was resistant to some of the Japanese customs we wanted her to try. Sleep on a futon on the floor? Not preferred, but after the first night, she declared it very comfortable. Go nude in a women's only public bath? No way. But when it came time to actually go, she came along and enjoyed the unique bathing experience. We also had a wonderful trip to Chicago together where we were hosted by cousins Alan and Susan. From seeing the Baha'i Temple near their house to watching a Second City show to the fabulous multi-course meal at Arun's Thai restaurant, Grandma was game for it all. She was even a good sport when we were slimed by the Blue Man Group. Grandma was there for my important milestones as a young person, my bat mitzvah, performances, wedding, and more. I was thrilled that she visited me in the hospital after all three of my children were born. We spoke by phone often, and we all know how she loved to gab. Even when I lived far away, we stayed in touch by phone and handwritten letters. I also have several of her voicemails saved that I will listen to when I want to hear her voice again. I was always proud to tell people about my grandma, who was 100, then 101, then 102, then 103, and even 104 years old. She lived a very long life, and I feel lucky to have been a part of it.
I think we're all going to be looking for a second lunch after this. Find the closest deli. I invite you all to please rise for the Almalei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, chanted in memory of Sarah bat Abraham v'Pesel.
Almalei Rachamim, shochein b'mromim, hamtzei menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina, b'mahalot kedoshim u'tehorim, kezohar harakia mazhirim, et nishmat Sarah bat Avraham v'Pesel shelcha le'olama b'Gan Eden tehem menuchata. Ana barachamim הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ביתרור, ביתרור, ביתרור החיים, את נשמתה אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, and perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, whose radiance is like the heavens, to the soul of Sarah, the daughter of Abraham and Pesel. May her memory be a blessing. May she rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may she find eternal shelter beneath your sheltering wings, and may her soul be bound up in the bond of life. God is her portion. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. In a moment, I'm going to invite those honored to serve as pallbearers to come forward. We will escort Sarah to her final resting place in the Charlotte Hebrew Cemetery. If you are joining us at the cemetery, would like to be part of the procession, please line up behind the escort vehicle in the parking lot. As we escort the casket from the room, her family will depart behind her, and then we follow them out.